Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to express my great disappointment that some of my colleagues have indicated by their vote that they are preventing the adoption of the National Defense Authorization Act. And they claim that more amendments and more debate are needed. This bill has been bipartisan from the beginning. It incorporated over 100 amendments at the committee level. There were additional approximately 60 amendments in the substitute on a bipartisan basis. Last week, before we adjourned, we offered 20 more amendments on a bipartisan basis, and they were rejected by my colleagues on the Republican side, just as this evening, this motion for cloture was rejected. And they have had, as I said, an opportunity to consider more amendments. We had 20 amendments last week that were ready on an equal basis to be debated and voted upon. And that was denied. And one of the ironies this evening is many of my colleagues who have had amendments in the bill, indeed were offered a chance to present their amendment, but were denied by Republican objections, came down and voted against the bill. It doesn't seem to be particularly logical in my mind. Now, in the course of NDAAs, and I've done a few, there have been periods in which there have been extensive consideration of the bill with very few, if any, amendments. There have been times in which only a handful of amendments were presented before we voted in cloture, passed cloture, and passed the bill. So this is an unusual departure from what is typically the custom of this body, particularly when we're beginning with a bill that has so much bipartisan support. The bill passed out of committee 23-3 because it represented all of the principal points that my colleagues wanted. In the course of the committee deliberations, there were 300 amendments presented, and we adopted 143. Mr. President, let me yield to the majority leader.
I thank my friend from Rhode Island. I just want to make a brief statement about the vote, and then I'll turn it over to him. So, my colleagues, there should be no misunderstanding about the absurdity that just played out on the floor. For a while now, Republicans have claimed they want to pass the defense authorization legislation immediately. They said we couldn't afford to wait any longer. They called it a core duty, a bare minimum. And they called on me to bring it to the floor for a full vote. But a few moments ago, Republicans just blocked legislation to support our troops, support our families, keep Americans safe. Republican dysfunction has again derailed bipartisan progress. The Republican choice to block our bill, and by an extension, legislation to support our troops and protect the homeland, can be summed up in two words: inexplicable and outrageous. I hope the American people are watching. And don't tell me we aren't offering a fair process. We have ample debate. We had amendments from both sides. We had a huge number of managers' amendments, equal numbers Democrat and Republican. We offered to debate, I believe it is 18 amendments, more than has been on most other bills of this type. In any other time in history, what we offered Republicans would be considered a very fair and generous compromise. But just because a few Republicans didn't get every single concession they insisted on, they're now halting the process. Despite this vote, Democrats will continue to work to make sure our troops get paid and our vital defense programs can continue. I thank my colleague for his courtesy and yield the floor back to him.
I thank the majority leader for his comments. And just to elaborate, this represents what the majority leader just pointed out. A few members on the other side frustrated the entire process, and ironically frustrated many of their own colleagues in their caucus who had amendments either in the substitute agreement or ready to be voted on. So this is not it's a question really of doing our utmost, as we have in the past, not for individual points, but for the support of the men and women in the military. That was the spirit that guided our efforts in the committee. Working closely with Senator Inhofe and all the members on both sides, we recognize that what we do ultimately affects the safety and the welfare of the men and women in uniform and their families. And in this legislation, I think we accomplished a great deal. This is, my sense, one of the most bipartisan bills we've ever considered. And it is unfortunate that we can't move forward on a bipartisan basis, consider this bill, and then go to the House and come back with a final legislation for consideration by this Senate. We will have to do the NDAA. It will be done. I think Senator Inhofe is committed to that, as I am, and we'll have to use the procedures that are appropriate to get it done. But we just missed an opportunity to send a clear message that we support this legislation, we support our troops, we're going to go to final passage, and then we're going to go and, together with the House, send the bill to the President of the United States. And one of the other aspects of this, many of the issues that were in contention in these amendments are not within the purview or jurisdiction of the Defense Committee. There were foreign relations issues, there were sanctions issues, et cetera. We often serve as a vehicle to move those issues along, but it's not central to the purpose of the National Defense Bill. What is central to the National Defense Bill, we accomplished. Resources for our troops, support for the near-peer competition that we're facing from Russia and China, investing in game-changing technologies, modernizing our ships and our aircraft and our vehicles, providing our service members with the resources and the support they need to defend the nation, at the same time taking care of those families. That's why we're here on the floor with the National Defense Authorization Bill. It's not to send political signals about foreign affairs and political issues. It is indeed an opportunity, not only an opportunity, a responsibility. And I think tonight we demonstrated irresponsibility to those who serve and their families, and I regret it immensely. Now I look forward, again, working with my colleagues and Inhofe and all members of the committee, to continue forward to develop legislation that will be acceptable to this body and pass, as we have for 60 some odd years, the National Defense Authorization Act. So with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor, and I would recognize and thank my